Welcome to this week's episode of Being Human. I'm delighted to say my guest is Marcel Schwantes. He is the founder of Leadership from the Core. He's a speaker, he's an author, he's an executive coach, joining us from Tennessee. Remind me of the town. Tell me.
Yeah, that would be Chattanooga, and even for me, it's tough as a U.S. based person because I came from Los Angeles, which is a lot easier to say. But Chattanooga is a small city in the southeast part of the U.S.
Yeah,
in the state of Tennessee, which is another state that you don't hear about often. We know about New York and California, but Tennessee, where in the world is that? So here I am in the backwoods.
Known for the whiskey, I suppose.
Oh yeah, and amongst other things that Southerns like to do, but that's for another podcast.
Right? Yeah. Okay, so the leadership from the core that pulled me in to begin with. Should we start there? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so when I was as an executive coach, the best sessions that I have, Richard, is when a client gets these aha moments, right? These breakthroughs. And the only way to get breakthroughs is when you go deep within yourself, when you gain a kind of self-awareness. But the only way to get to that state is to go to the core of who you are as a person. So that's, your values, leading from your character, from your integrity. And so I played around with the words, and I found that, you got to get to the core of something to get to the real. So in leadership is to lead from the core, is to lead from your most authentic self. So,
okay.
And when you peel back and peel back and peel back, you get to the heart of the person. So that's leadership from the core.
Okay. Well, authentic self. So that might sound to some people like a kind of a strange thing. So what do you mean by authentic? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that too many leaders fake it till they make it, as the saying goes. And those best, most aspiring leaders aren't afraid of expressing who they truly are as a human being. So that's being your true authentic self.
Yeah. And so who am I? So where do I start with that, right? So I can imagine something. So where do I start discovering who my true self is? Where do you, people who are in that position, they've got that question for you. Where do you start them?
That's a great question. An exploration of self-awareness, I think, would be a good starting point. And I think that might be self-awareness might be something that we'll be discussing throughout this conversation. We tend to want to, we have this thing called the imposter syndrome, right? And to defeat the imposter syndrome that is kind of residing in all of us, we have to not be afraid of being with our own emotions. So what does that mean? Well, sometimes you walk into a boardroom, an important meeting with clients or even with your employees, and they're looking at you as the leader. And sometimes there's things that you want to share that is really hard to share, challenging situations, maybe a change that needs to be expressed. And so a leader that isn't afraid of doing that is really in touch with their feelings. They speak from from their emotional intelligence, right? And so they have the mindset and they're mindful of speaking the good, the bad, and the ugly. They don't beat around the bush. They don't sweep things under the rug. So if there's bad news to be told, they say it. And what we find is, and the research will back this up, is that those leaders that aren't afraid to just tell it like it is and say it tactfully, with respect and and dignifying the human beings that you're speaking to, is those people, the trust level rises with their employees, those that they are in charge of, because they're not afraid and being, they're not afraid of what Kimberly Scott says. It's radical candor, right? But she hook on it. So that's basically being transparent and saying the really tough things. And I think that's what makes a really good leader as far as communication goes. So,
right, but it sounds to me like there's 2 points here, because I can speak with candor at some level about the reality of a situation without necessarily exposing what I'm feeling. So it sounds to me like you're talking about there's almost 2 levels of candor here, right? There's the candor about the facts, and then there's the candor of what's going on.
Right. Yeah, we're talking about, there's also the term selective vulnerability. No, you don't have to share your deepest, darkest secrets with in a workplace setting. The point is that in having candor, it's being in the moment where you're being emotionally present to your situation, to the situation around you, and being emotionally honest to communicate the hard things. And a lot of times leaders fear being in that space. It's scary. Now we're talking, we're delving into the whole soft skills arena. That you cannot be a good leader without mastering your soft skills. So we've moved into sort of the soft skills economy now, where trust and transparency are the new currencies. Tom Peters, the legendary author and thought leader, says soft is the new hard. And so that's what we're talking about here. You have to really work on your self-leadership, leading others, and that's all soft skills arena stuff, Richard.
Yeah. Soft is the new hard. So that's okay. So, and that's I think, yeah, I've heard that once before, and I think it's a very powerful thing to say. And for you then, right? So what have you found to be hard about developing your softness? Was there a moment in your journey with this where something started to click about this need to get to the core? To talk us through that.
Yeah, it was, getting to the point where you're able to sit in a room and stare people in the face and say, this is what's really going on. The thing that holds you back is fear. And fear is a terrible stumbling block to you developing your own leadership, because fear, there's all kinds of other negative emotions attached with fear. There's shame. So fear of failure, right? And because you think that you're not going to be pulling your weight and expressing too many emotions in the workplace. I mean, is it really appropriate to be that honest? Well, the worst case scenario is if you don't, and if you aren't that honest, it makes things even worse, because people will walk away wondering what was really going on. Was he really telling us the truth?
People sense it, right? Yeah.
Right. And so now what happens is you have these little sidebar discussions in the windows, you have gossip spreading, and then people are creating silos because they don't really know. They didn't get the true picture of what is happening, because the leader wasn't authentic with his true emotions. So when you master that ability, and you kill the fear inside your own head to say, I really have to just say what's really going on, excuse me, then conversations are going to be so much more impactful, so much more productive, and your employees are going to start building trust in those relationships with the leader.
Mm.
Yeah.
And when do you have an example of when you first started playing with this? Can you recall a moment where you decided, right, I'm gonna share this now?
Oh my goodness. So before I went out on my own, I can share the worst case scenario. My goodness, this takes me back a few years when I was spearheading talent management for a sister of companies, right, under one ownership. And one of those companies was headed up by a CEO who was he was a brilliant visionary. His creative abilities were off the charts, but he lacked in the soft skills area. It's very, very command and control, top down kind of a autocratic leader. And so as a talent manager, my role was to look at the exit interview data to find out what are the trends here, because they were bleeding talent. The turnover at one point was 60%. So I wanted to find out what in the world is going on. And so as I assessed the data and looked at the trends, reason number 5 was the CEO. And so I have to communicate to him, hey, for us to stop the turnover drama that's going on, it starts with you. You're reason number 5. And so I told him, how do you think that conversation went? When you're talking to an autocratic command and control person who does not have the self-awareness to understand that he is part of the problem. Well, it didn't go too well. The conversation backfired to the point where he he told me that he wanted the list of the people in that interview data report, that exit interview data report, which, by the way, if anybody in the world knows, that's privileged confidential information that's filed in an employee folder and stored in the vault somewhere that I don't even have access to, right? I'm the HR person here. So yeah, he stared me straight in the face and says, I want the names of every person that blame me for their exit. Well, I walked out of the office and I was shaking in my boots, man, because this guy, he meant it. And if I didn't do what he said, my job was going to be on the line. So I was going to be proof that here's another person that just quit being me that pointed back to him. So, and it did happen. The next day I resigned. I sent in my letter of resignation because I could not give him the interview report. Well, someone else actually got a hold of it. You got a hold of that because when fear is prevalent in the organization, even though I wasn't the one that did it, someone else had to take the marching orders out of fear to appease the CEO, and so he got the interview report with the names on it. So when I got wind of that, that true authentic self in me went and called every single one of those employees, because I felt that was the right thing to do, to let them know, hey, confidentiality has been breached. And I just wanted you to know. And I apologized on behalf of the organization, behalf of the CEO. As the person that did the exit interview, it fell on me, at least, to tell each one of those persons, listen, our confidence, the trust that we had in conducting that exit interview has been broken. So I want to take accountability for that on my end, that I give you my word that this was a confidential interview. And I explained that, the CEO didn't take it too kindly that the turnover pointed back right at him. And so I think that's when I began to kind of investigate what true, authenticity, as far as like tapping into your feelings and being in those moments that are extremely difficult. You think it was easy to call at each of those people that gave me their word, that I gave them my word, that shared from the heart what was really going on and how the work was impacting their health, their well-being, even their family life, because it was a fear-induced, stifling pressure cooker environment, and it could not handle the CEO anymore. And so they had to make a change. And I gave each of those persons my word, this is confidential, and I'm just going to use the data to see if we can change things around here. And so that's when I realized, okay, And each of those people that I spoke with, even though they were disappointed, they were obviously disappointed. They each thanked me for being brutally honest about the fact that this happened. And so that's when I began to realize that, hey, that did something in me. That triggered something in my heart. It's like that, it made me feel good, and it freed me up from any sort of guilt of having it just left it like that, where this CEO has the data and people's personal information of who gave the data. And so I cleaned up my side of the street, and that took a tremendous amount of authenticity. And so the long answer to your question, I guess, is that I think that's one of those moments where that I wanted to kind of dig deeper about, okay, well, why is it that we aren't able to do this? And why wasn't that CEO able to sit back and go, wow, Marcel, this is alarming. I need to do something about my own leadership style. And so that's what we're talking about here. And he lacked the self-awareness and the authenticity to look deep inside him, to begin the work of change and self-development and self-inquiry.
Yeah. And I think what I'm hearing in the story is that you take that first step of being authentic and acting with integrity, and you can't predict the results of that. And all of that unfolded. And yet through the act of doing it, ultimately you find it more freeing. That's what you said, right? And so it's you're discovering this new way of being in the world.
Yeah. And I went on my own and started my own practice, et cetera. And by the way, as sort of an addendum to that story, that company folded not too long after I left. And that's due in part to the leadership structure in place. They were, the antithesis of what we would call the authentic servant leader, right? Hiding behind walls, not sharing information, and just basically telling people, do as I say, as they say, what flows from the top down, right? So,
yeah. So if this guy was the antithesis of as if you introduced another idea, that a servant leader, then what is a servant leader, and why is it valuable to be a servant leader?
Well, let's backtrack a little bit to a little history. No, this will not be a history lesson, I promise, but we have to have context. So a few decades ago, back in 1970, a guy by the name of Robert Greenleaf wrote a little essay called "The Servant as Leader." Well, he arrived at the conclusion that the best leaders, and by the way, he worked at AT&T for a couple of decades, and he was in the training development arena back in those days. And as he conducted his surveys and his research and his interviews of what made the best leaders, even then, we're talking about in the 1950s here, everything pointed out to best leaders having mentoring skills. They were good coaches, and they paved the way for other people's successes. And so they met the needs of others. This was an unheard of prospect back in those days, because we were still very much deep into the industrial age. And so he wrote the essay in 1970, and then the researchers started to delve into, okay, what are the key tenets of a servant leader? Well, Greenleaf talked about quite a few of them. One of them being a listener, having good listening skills, not just hearing words, but being able to listen authentically, to be able to translate that into action. So if somebody is expressing a concern, an idea, you act on that, on your listening by creating some avenues for change on behalf of that person or the organization. So listening with action, right? And so the crux of servant leadership is really to make the person a better human being. Because when you do that, you make the person a better employee. And really good employees translate to better performance and good business outcomes. And so when I got wind of this servant leadership philosophy, I started to do my own research, and then I partnered up with people in academia. And one of those people that I partnered up with had done the research already. He had tested the servant leadership model that he developed with over 1,200 organizations. And so the key behaviors that I would call the building blocks of a servant leadership culture comes down to these 6. One is, speaking of authenticity, here we go again. Great servant leaders display authenticity, right? They're emotionally honest, they are transparent, and they're vulnerable. Number 2 is they value people. Again, these are our rather broad terms, but you value people by meeting their needs. You value people by giving them feedback, by respecting them, and providing for the needs. I think I mentioned that already. Number 3 is you share leadership. That's counterintuitive because it means that you no longer hold all the power. You want to release your power and allow others to make decisions as well. So what you're doing is you're pushing the authority down, so that people are taking ownership of their work. So that's sharing your leadership, right? That's number 3. And I hope I remember the others. Number 4 is provide leadership. So providing guidance. So that's setting the expectations and creating clear measures for results. And casting the vision and bringing people as co-creators of the vision. So it's not you're ramming your vision down people's throats. No, you are enrolling your team to design the vision with you and then carry it out. So that's provide leadership. And then setting the expectations. If things change, you have to reset your expectations so that they have clear goals. So that's number 4, which is provide leadership.
And I think that one in particular, sorry to interrupt, is one where servant leadership tends to get sort of misinterpreted. Because what I'll often hear about servant leadership is, but sometimes somebody's just got to get on and lead, right? Sometimes somebody actually does lead. And what you're saying is very clearly, principle 4 here, is the servant leader does provide leadership, guidance, expectations.
People think that servant leadership is a soft way of leading, and that it's doormat leadership, right? There's so many misconceptions about servant leadership. It's subservient leadership, and nothing could be further from the truth. These guys they demand excellence, and they hold people accountable. It's just a higher form of leadership. But you have the servant part, which is the soft skills, the real soft skills area. And then you have the leadership part, which is the accountability part that holds people to excellence, to performance. So the 5th one is, so we got so far reviewing display authenticity, value people. What did I say? Provide leadership and share leadership. Okay, we got 2 more. The 5th one is build community. So that's all about taking the values off of the nice plaque on the wall and making them live out those values within the hallways and within the walls of your organization. And so, those are the behaviors that say, this is how we belong and behave as a family inside these walls. Or even if you're in a remote company, that's fine too. You have these expectations by which you hire and fire and promote people. That's how you build community. That's how you build a great culture. And community cannot happen without personal relationships. And so the leader is out there getting to know people so that you're able to understand, these are his or her strengths, perhaps his or her weaknesses, and this is how I can make that person better. And you build community that way by engaging through relationships and frequent conversations. So that's the fifth one. What's the sixth one, Richard? Let me see if I can remember. It's because I'm going off of research here. The six key behaviors of a servant leadership culture. Which one am I missing? We have display authenticity, value people, provide leadership, share leadership, build community. Maybe it'll come back to me, but later, maybe you can ask me another question. I'll remember what that sixth one was.
Yeah, and of those six, then, I guess which of any of those have you personally found the most difficult to develop, and how have you enhanced your ability in that area?
I think the hardest one. So when I do my trainings, I always leave display authenticity for last, because I don't want to shock people into thinking that all of a sudden they have to express their emotions, God forbid. So we usually go through all the others, and then display authenticity is last, because by that time people are more it's a softer blow, because displaying authenticity has to have some vulnerability attached to it. And so that's the toughest one, as always, is being vulnerable. Not in a, again, people misconstrue the word vulnerability as a weak, soft area of leadership, and it's not. Jim Collins' book, Good to Great, he talked about the humble leader. There's two sides of a great leader in his research, right? You have fierce resolve, where you expect results, and then you have humility, and humility is the ability to be vulnerable with other people. So yeah, that's always the tough one.
And so in that context, can you remember a time when you first allowed yourself to be vulnerable, like where you first started playing with this?
Say that again, one more time.
So a time when you first allowed yourself to be vulnerable, like.
Yeah, as a leader myself, oh my goodness.
Yeah,
I think that is in the role of a leader of people, there's always moments of vulnerability when someone is not pulling their weight as far as performance, is sitting down and having that kind of a tough love conversation as a servant leader. You're not you're not downplaying the fact that somebody's underperforming. That's when authenticity has to show up in full force. To sit down with that person and say, "Hey, I noticed your performance is, you're not pulling up to speed here. What's going on?" And in listening, perhaps that person is having a personal problem at home, and so you want to find out what's going on, and if it's a repeated pattern of behavior, then of course some discipline has to take place here. Because now you're talking about the doormat leader that doesn't pull his own weight, to say, "Hey, we have some expectations, and you're not meeting those expectations."
Right.
Yeah. So you have to have both sides. And first, you start with understanding why is it that this person is underperforming, and see if you can problem solve around that. But if it's a repeated pattern of behavior, then you got to be that tough leader that says, "Okay, you know what? We need to change some things here." If that means to terminate that person, so be it.
And is that an area where you found yourself being most challenged? Is sitting down and having those tough love moments?
Nobody wants to have those conversations, but I think that when you do, and neuroscience, I'm going to pull in a little bit of neuroscience here. Is our brain is we have plasticity in our brain. The more we make something habitual, the better your chances of changing your behavior so that things become more the norm. Right. And so if you are struggling with having those emotionally honest conversations. Well, the hardest thing you'll ever do is to start having those conversations, because over time they will get easier and easier to have, because you're changing your brain patterns, in order to do that. So the behaviors become easier over time.
Yeah. And I'm sort of trying to imagine a way in here, because what I'm reminded of is when, some time back, I was in a 12-step group, right? And one of the things that we had to do at the start of this group is to finish the sentence, I feel. And actually you got a range of potential sentences that you got this kind of sheet handed out of 20 feelings you could. And I remember when I first started it, I found it so hard. I would just be like, I'm fine. And that's all I could do, right? And
right.
Somebody once described me as like pathologically English. Like I could, that's all I could manage. And that was for me what helped me start to break this, just to complete the sentence. I feel sad. I feel angry. Right. Really simple. But in my own journey with vulnerability, and I still struggle, because I can do that myself with my journal, and maybe in an intimate setting, I can start to share how I feel. Doing it in front of groups for me is definitely where my edge is.
Yeah.
But that was the start of me, I guess, learning to be more vulnerable. Do you have advice for people, or your own experiences of starting to develop that practice, that muscle?
No, I think that you nailed it. Is if you need to express something, it's good to start with, I feel that this is going on, but because you don't put the blame on someone else or a circumstance. This is something where you are being mindful in the moment of sharing. This is what's going on inside me, because now that disarms people from casting blame at each other and, well, he said, she said. No, it disarms people. So now they see the model being the leader, being vulnerable. That opens up other people to say, wow, I think it's safe here for me to do the same. And so that's what the leader is setting the conditions for his workplace, his or her workplace and culture, to say, this is a safe environment. I'm expressing how I feel about a certain situation that we need to work through together, and it's okay for you to do the same. So without reprimand, so the expectation has to be set by the leader for those conditions to take place, for employees to feel psychologically safe to do that. And that's when you see creativity and innovation start to skyrocket, because people now can use their brains, and people now can share freely what everyone wanted to say in the first place, because that leader made it safe to do so.
Okay. So and I think that's what we're starting to touch into now, is this the question of why now? Like, why has this become so important now to consider? And you just mentioned creativity and innovation. Is that the hub of it, that this movement towards this shift in leadership is being driven by that need, or are there other factors?
I think we have to back up a little bit. I think the innovation, creativity is sort of the end point of the end result of what happens when we work in an aspiring, collaborative, open, safe environment. But the reason to do it is because humans are designed, at the core of their being, they are designed to experience positive feelings, positive behaviors. Every one of us wants to get up in the morning and go, oh, I can't wait to be at work today. It's going to be an awesome day, because we have a kick-butt culture that respects each other, that values each other's opinions. And my leader is the one that sets the stage for that. So we want to foster an environment where positive emotions are being felt throughout an organization, because that when employees come into work, they feel good about themselves and good things happen. That translates, and here's the business case for it. That translates to better performance, higher productivity. If you're in a healthcare environment, your nurses are going to probably feel more compassionate towards their patients, so patient satisfaction ratings go up. If you're in a manufacturing environment and employees feel, quote, the love by their leaders, and it's a loving culture. Yes, I'm using the love word now because I'm all about that. So you'll see that safety ratings go up. They're making fewer mistakes, and that's what positive feelings do to a person. It's a mind blowing game changer that leads to competitive advantage when you have an organization where people belong and they feel safe and they feel good about themselves. Good business outcomes will come out of it. And
Right.
that's not just Marcel Schwantes saying that off the side of his mouth. That is proven over and over through research. And, when you look at Fortune magazine's annual publication of the best companies to work for, 1/3 of those companies, 100 best companies to work for list that comes out, 1/3 of those companies through various assessments that I've seen or articles that I've read are servant leadership companies. Well, it's no wonder they end up in those lists because people love working for them, and they are cultures of trust. And when you can trust your leader, when you can trust your coworkers, your peers, that translates to really good business outcomes. So
Yeah.
I'm gonna hop off my soapbox here.
No, I love it. Bring the love. Bring the love, Marcel. That's so important because your podcast is called Love in Action.
Right.
Am I right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's such a powerful word. And of course, there's a taboo about talking about it. But why shouldn't we have a right to feel loved at work?
Yeah. And the reason that that word gets a bad reputation. There's no place for love in a business setting. Come on, Marcel, that's crazy talk. Well, we're not talking about the kind of love that's going to make HR people nervous walking the halls and wondering if they have to call legal to come down because a couple of employees are expressing love in the wrong way. No, we're talking that there's nothing appropriate about love in the romantic sense or any other non-business term of the word. What I'm talking about here when I say love is, and that's why I call it love in action, is because the love that we're talking about of all the kinds. So if we have a history lesson of the word love from the Greek, right? From the Greek sense of the word, it's the agape love, not all of the others. So cross off eros, cross off all the others, and just focus on agape love, because that's the one that every leader should be after. Agape love is the love that says, I got your back, and I'm going to do everything in my power to make this an environment for you to succeed in. So it's love backed by action. It's a verb. It's not a feeling or emotion.
And that comes back to early in this conversation, you talked about that in terms of listening for action, listening for the action I'm going to take to make you, at least this is how I heard it, to make you a better person. That's what you said, right? So
right. And I have to attribute Ken Blanchard, who I brought on the show, episode 2 or 3. And Ken Blanchard said this: servant leadership is love in action. And so I ran with that, and I kind of borrowed that from Ken himself, who's, as you know, has written a gazillion books on servant leadership, and he has no problems talking about the word love in a business or leadership sense.
Right. And would you say that's your vision then? Is it for a world populated with businesses run on love?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's unique to me, but it's not a unique vision. I mean, the conscious capitalist movement is about love in action. Servant leadership movement is about love in action. Even some of those B Corp organizations that do good in the world for profit, they're all about love in action. Even if you don't have if you sell widgets, if you're in a financial services industry or something that doesn't directly impact the human being for good, you can still do good inside your own organization. and to raise the awareness and the well-being of your employees, so to make it a great workplace environment for them. And you do that through love and action.
Yeah. And the other thing I'm getting from what you said, and this is a couple of steps back now, but when you talked about this, the kind of conditions for people to feel like they've got this love at work, you singled out the leader, right? They need to feel like their boss, the person they identify as the senior individual, is modeling this, is doing this. And I think that's so important, right? The people who, for whatever reason, get anointed into some form of, quote, leadership role, they have a special responsibility for this, would you say?
Yeah, and that's a good question that triggered a thought in me. We obviously would aspire to any executive listening on the call to champion this cause. As if you see the possibilities of servant leadership culture in your organization, sure, it starts with you at the top, championing the cause, and then filtering down the principles down, empowering your middle management, who will then empower their employees. Does it work that way? Not always, because the people at the top may not have the vision. So if you're a middle manager on a call, or even somebody that's heading up a 10-person team inside a ginormous organization, can you still be a servant leader? Absolutely. The answer is yes, even though you may not have it as a strategy coming from the top down. And so I always tell those middle managers that may be in a stifling setting, you can start with your own team and bring the model and start seeing changes, start empowering people, start developing them, give them what they need, et cetera, et cetera. What I've seen is that those middle managers that become servant leaders, well, their numbers start to improve. So as the organization does those annual, employee engagement, employee satisfaction surveys that go out, there's always that one department that's like, all of a sudden, the numbers are like, shot straight up. And so that takes notice. And then the executives start to wonder, what's going on down there at John Smith's department? Let's find out. So that starts a conversation about, why is it that John Smith's department is outperforming his peers? Well, that's one way to then make a case for servant leadership organizational wide. So,
yeah, I can really see that, because I can quite imagine that some people are maybe feeling a bit cynical, like, oh yeah, that might work in some other organization, never going to work in my company. But yeah, you've still got this ability to do something within your team, with those around you.
Yeah.
Start to take these principles, and as you say, people will look over and like, what's going on there? Maybe it starts to spread.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, I like that. And is there a point though where is there a limit to that? Is there ever a situation where you advise people, okay, the environment you're describing is you're just better off out? I mean, or do you think there's always a place to start?
Yeah, that's good. Let's talk about that, because people on the call are going, this is just kumbaya, hold hands around the campfire stuff. It would never work in my organization.
Yeah,
and you're right. If your organization is focused on short-term results, and you put profit over people because you're always looking at your quarterly numbers as the target, this is never going to work for you. It takes a few seasons for a culture, any kind of culture, to develop. It's not a flip of the switch. And so aspiring leaders listening that are saying that could be potentially a good thing to happen here, know that it's a long-term process. But that's what we shoot for. We want our organizations to become sustainable, not the ones that, like mine, that had a 60% turnover, and you try to stop the bleeding all the time, right? And so where it doesn't work is an organization that is only focused on the short-term gains, short-term results, okay? Servant leadership is not going to be too conducive to that kind of environment. And then the other if you're a moving target, and you're in a constant state of flux, maybe you've had a current merger, and your culture is changing, et cetera, et cetera. When things settle down, the smoke clears. That's when you want to bring in the strategy for servant leadership. Not when it's in the state of crisis, when your organization is in a state of crisis. Because in a state of crisis, you probably do want a little bit of that top-down person to march down the halls and say, this is how things have to be done around here. So you might want to filter out some bad apples before you bring in a servant leadership culture, because not everyone is going to buy into it. I've come into organizations as a consultant where the CEO immediately tells me, yeah, well, it's not going to work with this VP and this VP. Well, 6 months later, those two VPs were gone because they didn't buy into it. So they understood, okay, I need to make a change. So that's what we're talking about. It's, it's going to take a few seasons. There might be some turnover. You might have to change some of your top leaders to buy into this vision and to champion the cause. But in the long term, servant leadership is the best model I can think of for sustainability and long-term results. And that's going to benefit all your stakeholders over time, right? Because things now are stable down the line.
Right. So where you've got some stability and where there's a tolerance for some long-term thinking, then you've potentially got an opening.
There you go.
Yeah. No, I can understand that. And I can see that actually that does work potentially at different levels, because if you're in a long-running team which isn't experiencing a lot of chaos, even if you haven't got support all the way up, you can still make some progress with this strategy. I could imagine. Yeah. Great. Well, I love the fact we've talked about love, because I've always thought that we should be using that word more in our conversations in work. And organizations run on love. It doesn't have to be kumbaya. Let's have it not be kumbaya. Let's have it just common sense. I mean, that for me would be nirvana with this. Well, that's, of course, why wouldn't we?
Oh yeah. Love is the new competitive advantage. We have to remove our mentality, our psyche. We still live in a business world that is very much still. I mean, we're seeing the relics of the industrial age still alive and well in business, and that's a shame, because the world has changed, and employees' mindsets have changed, and now leadership has to catch up to what makes for a positive work environment for your employees, who will then turn that and make it a great positive environment or a positive experience for your customers. So, the research is out. You take care of your employees, they'll take care of their customers. It's as simple as that. Simple equation. Yeah. But we got to remove ourselves from the mindset that goes back 100 years or longer.
Yeah. Love them too. Love everyone, including the customers. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. No, I get that. All right. So final question I often like to ask my guests, Marcel. This show, after all, is called Being Human. To you, what does it mean to be human?
Oh, boy. I think that to me, being human is putting others ahead of yourself. And that's not denying your own needs. But I cannot lead, and I cannot call myself a leader if I don't first take care of the needs of others. And I think that's the number one thing we need to do as leaders, is just like a good father. I have a 6-year-old. I have to take care of his needs for him to thrive and hopefully become a productive member of society when he joins the work world, right? It is no different as a leader. What does it mean to be human? Is to lead from a place where you look at people's needs first ahead of your own. And like I've been preaching throughout this conversation, is to find out how to make someone better. a better human being. Because when you have better human beings, you have better people, better workers, better work environments. So that's, to me, is what being a better human being is.
Beautiful sentiment. Yes. I love it. Okay, so for people who want some more Marcel and more deeper understanding of servant leadership, there's tell people where to find you.
Leadership from the core, CORE.com. Leadershipfromthecore.com is my website. And you'll find everything there. My Inc. column. You can join my email list. You'll see the Love in Action podcast on the website, where I interview the world's luminaries about this very topic that we're talking about, how to love well in the workplace for business results. So that's where I would go. And feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn at Marcel Schwantes or Twitter at Marcel Schwantes.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time and taking time out of your Thanksgiving celebrations. I really appreciate it. It's been a wonderful, really energizing conversation. Yeah.
Good. Yeah. I'm glad. I enjoyed talking to you across the pond.
Yeah. It's just another weekend for us. But yeah. Thanks again. Really enjoyed it, Marcel.
You bet. It's been a pleasure.
Enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks.